So yeah, last time we saw we were looking at the life of Abraham, and we can go to the Genesis and see the review. And so, I was pointing out the part about I think like 2-3 things I was pointing out last week about how we must not get the picture of Abraham that he was always this solid man of faith, but that when you look at the very beginning, first of all, his pagan past, he worshipped idols. He was like any other idolater during that time. He was a normal idolater, a typical one, serving idols. And I'm not sure if among the idols, Yahweh was one of the gods that they knew. I'm not sure. But he was like that, and then God one day appears to him and tells him to get out of your country, from your relatives, your father's house, to the land that I'll show you. I'll make your name great, and you'll be a blessing. God appears to him, it seems. Acts tells us God appears to him and gives him a message. And it seems, based on the combination of all these accounts, that initially it seems like he told his father, and so they ended up, it says at the end of Genesis 11 that they were traveling towards Canaan, but then they settled in Haran, and then they were there until the father died, Terah died, and then that's when Abraham leaves and goes toward Canaan, and even then he's still with his nephew Lot. So you see kind of like partial obedience, partial following, which is, I think, understandable. And the thing that's wonderful is that God is like a understanding God, if I can say it that way, that he doesn't expect this full-fledged faith, like right away from the beginning. That even with this kind of like partial faith kind of thing, and then when the famine comes, in Genesis 12, he leaves the area, he leaves the land. I think we can definitely see this as something of a lack of faith. The fact that I understand famine is extremely serious during this time, but still, the fact that he not only leaves and goes to Egypt, but then with the half lying about his wife, this is my sister, basically giving her away. I mean, which is just crazy, but for the sake of his life, he does that, which is, But then, so those weaknesses we see, but then he experiences God plaguing Pharaoh's household, Pharaoh and his household, with great plagues, it says. So then Abraham is coming to know about this God. One of the things I pointed out is how as Abraham starts journeying with God, as he comes to know God more and more, you see little by little faith increasing, just like people's relationship, where as you come to know certain people, you come to trust them more. He's coming to, little by little, have more faith while experiencing God more. And I went into just how that's the Christian life also. It's a journey. I, by God's grace, have known the Lord, 17, 18 years now, and it's been a journey, and times where I'm doing much better, just spirit-full, spirit-filled, spiritually doing so good, but then other times where I'm not doing so good, times of trials, times of testing. It's a journey, and unfortunately, we see all around us, I've seen all around myself, people that were companions, brethren around that I served the Lord together with, but have fallen away. So many of those people, but hopefully it's the case that as we journey with the Lord and as we experience Him more and more, our faith becomes more and more solidified. I think we can really think about that, where I am. I mean, you can ask the question, how many years have I been walking with the Lord, like Enoch did? He walked with God for a long time, and God took him away. But how many years I've been journeying with the Lord, and how much have I experienced Him? Not only like just His presence here and there, which is amazing, but also His workings, like answers to prayer, amazing ways of provision, answer to prayer with all kinds of things. Because when you journey with the Lord, you come to know Him in such a way where if somebody comes to you and says something like, God doesn't exist, or Jesus never existed, it's such a jokey statement that It's like saying, hey, did you know your wife didn't exist? Your wife doesn't actually exist. It's like, you just stare at the person. It's like, man, you don't understand. Because I walk with him. I know him. I've been walking with him for like this many years, 15 years plus. I know him. And you just have pity on him because he doesn't understand. See, God designed it in such a way where he is unseen. He's not tangible. He set it up in such a way where you can experience him, you know his presence. And that's how it's supposed to be. So, yeah, we can think about that. And so Abraham, he's journeying, and he is getting to know about this God more and more. And in chapter 14, his nephew was taken captive with the 4 kings versus 5, king of Sodom involved, like the whole war going on, and then David, why am I saying David? Because of the battle thing, but not David yet. Abraham, he takes his men, 300 some men, and then God giving victory. And as I said last time, again, this background is very important. The whole polytheism system, where pretty much everyone during that time, their normal view, their understanding was, there are many, many different gods who are in charge of different realms. When you have some sickness, you go to this God, who they say is a God of healing. When you have an issue of you don't get any children, you go to this other God, who they say, oh, when you go to this God and worship this God, serve this God grants children, open the womb. This other God, where if you go out into the sea, there's this God that can protect you, or a battlefield, a God that can give you victory in battle, on and on and on, all these different gods. But Abraham is coming to know this God grants victory. He plagued Pharaoh's household. He's providing this prosperity with all this flock increasing. You see that with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The fact that pagans notice these guys, when they're like working for you, or when you're working with them, like you prosper. So that's one of the ways God made himself known. And so Abraham's experiencing this, and he's coming to know this God more and more. So, like the very thing that we read in the Bible about our God, I hope we have experienced it. The Bible speaks about God's provision. Don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear, where you're going to, your household. That God takes care of you. He provides for you. Experiencing that. Don't take vengeance, but I will repay. Experiencing that, where you don't take vengeance, you simply just pray, and God takes care of things. Experiencing those things, and more just coming to know him. He meets Melchizedek, this priest who says this is God Most High. That would have given some revelation to Abraham, because there's also this thing of like different gods are in different places, where like some gods are more powerful and higher. There's like superiority, and other gods are lower, that kind of stuff too. But he meets this Melchizedek who says, well, first of all, he's called the priest of the Most High God, a very interesting character. And then he keeps saying God Most High, God Most High. And then also by this time, Abraham, he says, like, I have raised my hand to Yahweh, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. So that's pretty huge. We so take this for granted. We just don't really recognize anything when we from our standpoint, when we read things like this. Well, of course, God is possessor of heaven and earth. But you have to see that in this context, this kind of understanding of God was a big thing. That he understands this Yahweh God to be possessor of heaven and earth. And, in chapter 16, sadly, when he's about 85 years old, the whole Hagar, through Hagar getting Ishmael. And, by that time, as I said, very likely either Sarah recognizing menopause or like her period maybe having stopped. We don't know. But something of that maybe, that causing them to go this route. By chapter 17, so he's 99 years old. So from chapter 16, where he was like, at the end of chapter 16, he's 86 when they have Ishmael. By chapter 17, it says Abraham was 99 years old. So it had been 13 years. And I mean, by then, I think this is also pretty important. If you think about 13 years, in a way, that's a pretty long time. And God had given this clear promise of, what's the two primary promises?
You'll be a father of many nations.
Yeah, yes, descendant and land.
Right.
Those are the two primary promises, but he's not seeing any of them. So he left when he was like 75, and now he's 99. It's been almost 25 years, and no sign of Sarah getting pregnant. But God here appears to him, walk before me and be blameless, verse 1, and then I'll make a covenant with you. And then Abraham, he falls on his face, and then verse 3, fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. And I think by now, when God says, you'll be a father of many nations, in chapter 15:6, when God said, look at the stars in the sky, so shall your descendants be, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted him for righteousness. But this is my guess, based on some clues, but when God says, you'll be a father of many nations, I think we're going to see in a little bit, but I think by this time, it was like just faith going down, having gone down a bit, because now it's been many years, 13 plus years. So verse 5, no longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, so father of many nations. So going from exalted father, probably a name that his father/mother gave, exalted father, God changes it to Abraham, which is father of many. In this context, it's because he's going to be a father of many nations. And I'll make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations out of you. Kings shall come from you, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your seed after you. And God is saying this when he doesn't even have a single one. And I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I'll be their God. And let me just share something. Again, it had been many years, over a decade. So I think we all know something of this. Our faith can be more stronger in certain seasons, with more passion, more faith, but with time passing by, with different seasons, our faith can go down. There are seasons where your faith can go down, and I think this would have been like that. Early on, he experienced all these things of God's protection, plaguing Pharaoh, and God giving victory, and all these amazing things. But then, by this time, it's just, faith just probably a little more down, because he's just not seeing the promise. But God is saying these things. He keeps saying land, descendant, and then he tells him about the sign of the covenant, the foreskin circumcision. And verse 15, after the circumcision, can anybody get 15 and 16?
Sure. God also said to Abraham, as for Sarah, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai, her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her.
So when God gives this word, verse 17, then Abraham, this is why I said what I said about the weakness in the faith. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, so it says here that he says it in his heart, he doesn't say it out loud, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old, because he's 99, basically 100 years old, and shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, now he's saying to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Oh, just, okay, Ishmael is fine. Okay, it's that's good enough. I mean, it's kind of late. But 19, then God said, no, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you will call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. So this is so huge. They haven't had any children for decades. And even after God gave the promise, it's been 25 years or so. He had said 25 years ago, when he first called him, land descendant, but they haven't had anything. And God is saying again, no, it's going to be through Sarah that you're going to bear a son. And he even tells him the name in advance. It's going to be a son, and you will call his name Isaac, which means like laugh for laughter, and I will establish my covenant with him. He brings up this covenant thing that they had during that time, what they did, the contract agreement thing that they did, that my covenant is with him for an everlasting covenant. So all these promises, when there doesn't seem to be any hint, that's how our God works, okay? Now this is going to, in the coming weeks, this is going to be huge because God's people, they're given all kinds of amazing, amazing promises. And there's not a single clue, in a way, of any of that. Like, you don't see any new heaven and new earth. You don't see the Lord's return. You don't see any resurrection. Are you serious? Like resurrection of dead bodies? Yeah. All kinds of things. And God, he works this way, where he lays out all these promises. He gives his word about all kinds of things that are like unbelievable. He likes to do it this way. And gets people's faith, and then he fulfills his word. And so, yeah, he even says, 21, but my covenant I will establish with Isaac, and whom Sarah shall bear to you at this set time next year. And so, when you go to chapter 18, God and two angels visit him, and Abraham pretty much prepares a whole feast for these three men. They appear as humans, and during their eating of this huge feast kind of thing that he prepared, verse 9, 18:9, then they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, here in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. So the manner of woman had stopped from Sarah, no more period. And so Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also. So there's that 11:11 Hebrews. I guess the Greek is a little tricky. So basically, I guess this Greek word, instead of, my translation says, by faith Sarah herself also received power to conceive seed, that part. But I guess that Greek word is usually like deposit seed. So that basically, it's not talking about her faith, but it's talking about Abraham's faith. So the phrase meaning power to conceive seed, not that, but power to, deposit seed. So that's why this net translation, by faith, even though Sarah herself was barren and he was too old, he received the ability to procreate because he regarded the one who had given the promise to be trustworthy, faithful. But yeah, I think she's definitely, with the period having stopped, I think it's likely at least pretty weak in the faith. Maybe not even really believing. But, verse 14, I have it highlighted. Is anything too hard for Yahweh? Yeah, we see that many times in Scripture. So, in this situation where she probably hadn't had her period for years now, as she's going through her menopause, as she feels her body changing and all that going on, I think it's definitely possible, even likely, that she just was losing hope. And, people know when your period is over, like, it's over. You're not going to have children. But in this situation, is anything too hard for Yahweh? And obviously, implied answer, no. At the appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. But he said, no, you did laugh. So, yeah, she's kind of rebuked there. And then, with Sodom and Gomorrah, just basically, God tells Abraham about, how he's about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for his wickedness. And, of course, Abraham is concerned because his nephew is living there. And so he intervenes. We probably know about this. And then the next day, we know God rains fire, brimstone, fire, sulfur. And the next day, chapter 19, verse 27, Abraham, he did what he can to intercede. He lowered it from 50 people to 5 people or something. He starts out, if there are 50 righteous people in the city, then, are you going to be like just? I mean, how about, what if there are 50 righteous people? And then he brings it down to 10? Okay, so it's 10. Assume, thinking that, okay, there should be at least 10 people. But no. And 1927, and Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before Yahweh. Then he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah. So he was like probably on a hill, mountaintop, something, and he's looking towards Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land which went up like the smoke from a furnace. So this would have been another revelation. Okay, this God, I mean, he appeared to me and he told me about Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's going to destroy it. And the next day he goes and he tried to intercede, and he remembers 10 people, but basically he finds out, okay, there weren't even 10 people, and it was just completely destroyed. And I've wondered, did Abraham ever like find out about Lot, that he did survive? I'm guessing he would have, because he lives many more years till 175, and I'm guessing he would have, they would have gotten in touch again. But I think very interesting. So remember, have you guys seen a video of Sodom and Gomorrah? Did you know, like, there are people that travel in that region and they have seen that region, like sulfur? Like, you can check videos, but there have been many people, there are like documents of people. Scholars have been not too sure about exactly where Sodom and Gomorrah is. They know it's like near the Dead Sea, or, somewhere, but they didn't know where it was. But the past probably decades, there have been people that have traveled to that region, and all the description, it's very, very obvious and clear that they have sulfur there. And the whole place is like a desert. It's absolutely just destroyed. But you can see in videos of these things that look like what would have been buildings, these structures. But of course, they're all completely destroyed, but they see those things. And yeah, you can find plenty of videos on it. But what's important is, when you look at that, you would have never imagined that was at one time, it was like a well-watered, wonderful place. When Abraham and Lot was separating, why did Lot choose that side? Because it even brings up the Garden of Eden. It was that wonderful looking, just prosperous. So, I mean, I know it's different, but you can picture, like, today, a city that's well established. You can think of, I know it's not the best example because it's so different, but like San Francisco or something. One of the reasons I point that out is because of the whole gay thing with Sodom and Gomorrah in there. But when you look at these cities, you would not picture like a desert-looking place. But that Sodom and Gomorrah was once a flourishing, wonderful, established city with people living there. But it was absolutely destroyed. Basically, God sent hell, because we know hell, fire and sulfur, it's basically hell. God rained hell on it and absolutely destroyed. And remember, Lot, the reason why they separated is because they had so much flock, they couldn't travel together anymore. He lost everything. They couldn't save anything. And remember, Lot's wife, why would she have looked back and become a pillar of salt?
Remorse?
Yeah, it's probably remorse along with all that was left behind. All that $1 million home in today's term. All the flock and everything. Memories probably in various things. Because they had been living there for probably had been, 20 years or whatever. But yeah, Abraham, he sees this power of God and how he's a righteous God. And in chapter 20, there's Abraham and Abimelech, and basically the same thing happens where he lies about his wife. This is my sister, and so, but then God intervenes. If you look at the end, verse 17, so Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants, and they bore children. For Yahweh had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So Abraham is coming to see, he closes wombs and he opens wombs. That's very interesting. It's placed right there, right before now Isaac's birth. So chapter 21:1, and Yahweh visited Sarah as he had said. Okay, as he had said. It's important. And Yahweh did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God has spoken to him. So, yeah, God had appeared in chapter 18 to them, and God even specifically said, not only is it going to be Sarah, but according to like the time of life, basically, like, I think that's basically saying like around next year, around this time, something of that you will have a child. And just like God said, God visited Sarah and she conceived. And it would have been an amazing time where Sarah, she conceives. Now, she no longer had her period, so there isn't any change there. But she conceives, and she would have started noticing some changes in her body, whatever women feel when they get pregnant. Some changes. And as the days go by, weeks go by, it's more and more becoming evident, her belly. And it would have been a pretty unbelievable time. They're 90, 100, and her stomach is coming out more and more. And just, yeah, it would have been an amazing time, starting to feel him, and just, Abraham would have put his head next to the belly, and yeah, that would have happened. And then, she bears Isaac. And I think we would agree that this would have been like the pinnacle state of their faith, where my wife, I no longer had my period, but this God said from the way beginning, from the very first call about descendant, and when my period was over, when my wife's period is over, she conceives, and now we have this baby, this boy. So this is supernatural involved, and they would have now been just absolutely established in their faith. They know this God definitely keeps his word. He absolutely keeps his word. Just as he said, it comes to pass. And Hagar and Ishmael, they with the whole the weaning of Isaac, and then what Ishmael does, they're kicked out. And then chapter 22. So when you experience something like that, I hope all of us can experience something like that, where like this God is exactly according to his word. To share one story, last week I told you guys about how there was a time where I didn't have enough money to pay my utility bill. So this was a time where I stepped down from a church I was serving at, and somebody from my church knew I had stepped down, or I was going to step down, and so he knew somebody that had he knew somebody that knew somebody else that had a dry cleaner's place. And so I decided to work there for some money. And basically what happened was, it wasn't like full time, it was just like here and there, just some hours when they needed help. I worked there, and there was this time where I was lacking, like I have it written in my journal. I know the amount written in my journal, but I don't remember it right now. But I do know it was like anywhere from $3, $4, $5, $6 around there. No, it wasn't that much. It was like $3, $4 maybe. So, as I told you, there's a time when I was living in such a way where like it's just based on faith, and just barely having enough, and that's fine. And I'm at this place where I need to pay my utility bill, and I'm lacking that amount. And a customer came in. I still remember it was a lady that came in, and she was picking up her clothes, and it was anywhere from $13-something, $14-something, like around there somewhere. So I tell her, this is the amount, and she picks up her clothes. She gives me a $20 bill, and I'm getting the change, but she starts walking away, about to leave, and I tell her, hey, you have change. And she said, "Oh, it's okay, go ahead and keep it," and left. Now, I'm never going to forget this, but when she did that, the owners that were standing over there, husband and wife, they were amazed and they were very, very almost shocked, because they had a dry cleaners for years, but customers never do that. If there's like coin change, less than $1, they can leave that, whatever. I don't care, it's fine. I don't need the change. But when it comes to, remember, this is like over $5, and she says, "No, it's fine. Go ahead and keep it." And so they're standing there, like shocked, like, did that really happen? Because this just never happened, something like this. And basically, the husband is like, well, Jonathan should keep it because he's the one at the counter. And that's how God provided for me. And that never happened again. But see, that one time when I was lacking 3, 4, 5, whatever dollars of utility bill, God provided in that kind of way. And that's just our God. Yeah. So, when we experience the kind of things that God does, and there's so many more things I can share, but I hope, like I said last week, we live biblically and come to experience God, because it's just, Him. I mean, He's real. He's according to His word. So, Abraham and Sarah, they experienced this. And so this would have like settled it. Like, they know this God, He keeps His word. And so this Genesis 22, which is like the most well-known account connected to Abraham. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." And he said, "Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, of which I will tell you." So the key issues that are involved are, number one, God clearly said, my covenant is going to be with Isaac. Basically, it's going to be through Isaac the promise is going to be fulfilled. In Isaac your seed shall be called or named. And so God had clearly said that. But then, we don't know how old Isaac was. I think scholars usually think around just teen age. So whether younger teen, mid, or late, I think it's more towards younger or max mid. But anyways, because if you know this cultural background, they had like child sacrifice that they did. And they usually didn't child sacrifice when the child is like an adult. Like, it's usually when they're like little. In a way, the most important part that's connected to the issue of faith is God said it's going to be through Isaac. Basically, the promise is going to be fulfilled. So this God who said it's going to be through Isaac, all the descendants, nations coming out, kings coming out, all that, He says, offer Isaac as a burnt offering on the mountain. So then it's like, what? But that's why, as we know, Hebrews 11, I mean, first of all, there's a clue right here in the passage. This is probably where the author got it, but verse 3, so Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off, and Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey." He probably has to get them to stay because he's about to do what he's going to do. "Stay here with the donkey. The lad or boy and I will go over and worship, and we will come back to you." So the only conclusion that you can come to based on all of God's word is, if I end up sacrificing my son, which, by the way, involved slaying with the knife and the fire and the wood, you light the sacrifice on fire. That's the whole burnt offering. So that's just a graphic reality. But based on what God said, the conclusion is, well, then God is going to raise him from the dead. And that's why, of course, Hebrews 11, you just can't not read it, where 17, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises, see, he mentions this, he who has received the promises offered up his one and only son, of whom, Isaac, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from death, he also received him in a figurative sense. So the author of Hebrews knows there was a definite glimpse of the gospel. Not only death, not only the burnt offering on that very location where Jesus would be crucified, but there's a hint of the resurrection. Just like Abraham believed God, that, well, this God who did all this, if he needs to raise him from the dead, he can do that. He gave this Isaac when Sarah no longer had her period. He supernaturally gave us this child. Well, he can raise him from the dead. And what we need to remember is, for us today, we know of resurrection accounts all over, whether Elijah, Elisha, the boys, the widows, the boys, New Testament times, apostles, Jesus raising people from the dead. But there wasn't any of that. This is really important. This is 2000 BC. There's no such thing as resurrection. There's no such thing as someone being brought back from the dead. For us, we have read it all over the place. We're familiar with it. Abraham, there was no such thing. So the fact that he had gone to this level of faith, it's amazing. That's how firm he became with Isaac's birth. He can raise him from the dead. This God said, promise is going to be fulfilled through Isaac. Well, then the conclusion is, well, he will raise him from the dead. And of course, he is about to offer him up, and God stops him, and don't lay your hand on the lad, for I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So after this, 15, and the angel of Yahweh called to Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares Yahweh, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants will possess the gate of their enemies, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So this would have been just very, in a way, kind of strange. God, he just did this to test. But of course, we get to know that God, one of the main, if not the main purpose of why God had this happen is to give a picture of the gospel. That 2,000 years later, he would take his son, his one and only son, whom he loved, and at the very same location, offer him up as a burnt offering. And that time, there's no God that stops him. God fully offered his son on the altar as a burnt offering to provide salvation for his people. And he actually did die. He wasn't spared. He actually did die, but he rose again from the dead. The very thing Abraham had in mind gets fulfilled. So it's just amazing. And chapter 23, so I'm pretty sure a lot of people would wonder about chapter 23. Okay, Sarah, she lived 127 years, and the years of this, this was the life of Sarah, and she died in Kirjath Arba, that is Hebron. So she dies, and we have a whole chapter. Now, I know originally no chapter division, but it's a long section going into this thing of like talking back and forth about buying this cave for a large sum of money. Do you have any thoughts on why it has this 20-verse thing of, it could have just said, Abraham, he bought a cave from Heth, the sons of Heth, for 400 pieces of silver. It could have just kind of said that, but it has this long dialogue and all this.
They'd been given the land promise, and yet here he is not having any piece of land to do anything with. So
exactly, yeah. Yep. God had promised descendant land, 2 primary promises. But it's to the point where Sarah never saw that fulfilled. Now, she did get to see Isaac, that part being fulfilled. Okay, a little glimpse of the sand on the seashore descendant thing. Okay, supernatural birth, yes. Supernatural conception and birth. But then when it comes to land, this God clearly said, look east and west and north and south, all this land, this is going to be yours and your descendants. But till her death, and Abraham also, till his death, they never get a square inch. To the point where when Sarah dies, Abraham has to negotiate, talk with these sons of Heth, and he has to give, in verse 14, and Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, my Lord, listen to me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. And what is that between you and me? This is just amazing. You can, even if you don't know the culture, you get an idea of how they bargained or how they did, like the wording, the way they said it. I mean, 400 shekels of silver, what is that between you and me? Well, if you find out how much this money was, how much this 400 shekels of silver was. Okay, 400 shekels of silver was a substantial price. It would be equal to about 7.25 pounds of silver. In comparison, Omri, in 1 Kings, he bought the site of Samaria, a huge land, whole city area, for 6,000 shekels of silver. So 6,000 versus 400. 6,000 to buy a whole humongous, like this huge area of a city. And Abraham, he's buying this cave thing with maybe a little bit of area for 400 shekels of silver. So it's an enormous amount. And so the whole point is, he has to spend this enormous amount of money to buy this little piece of land to bury his own dead. That's important with this issue of faith. And after 24, a bride for Isaac, we know he ends up dying when he's 175. And basically, chapter 25:7, this is the sum of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age. Okay, so here's the final thing now. Perfect timing now. God gave the promise from the very beginning, land and descendants. He clearly said, to you and your descendants I give this land. But till his last breath, he never got any of the land. What would have Abraham concluded?
If he really believed God, he would have concluded that his descendants would get land.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that part's fine. But God also said, to you and your descendants I give the land. It would have been, this life is not all that there is. This God keeps his word. Absolutely. So the conclusion is, see, this is an amazing hint in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, you don't really know the afterlife. It's so hidden. Only in the New Testament, it's more fully revealed. All throughout the Old Testament, the afterlife is really dark. It's like you go to Sheol, you descend. There are all these phrases, gathered with their fathers, slept with their fathers. That's what you have. Abraham, by this time, he would have known this God, he keeps his word. And so the conclusion had to have been, I believe he would have had faith. The only explanation is, there is life after this. This is not over, which is exactly true. God keeps his word. When is it fulfilled? It's not fulfilled during this lifetime. And we know Abraham is going to be, among the saints that have the land. And so we know that God, he keeps his word. So the promise till the end of his life, not seeing a square inch being fulfilled, the only conclusion is, so when is it going to be fulfilled? It's afterwards. This life is not everything, which is incredible. It's such a huge thing. When I came to see this, it was amazing, because again, like the resurrection issue, we're so familiar with like the afterlife, the Lord's presence, new heavens and new earth, all that stuff. This is 2000 BC with none of that kind of stuff. But he believes in resurrection, and based on the promise, it had to be that he knows that there is afterlife. This life is not it. There's more. For a 2000 BC time period, man who had no New Testament, he doesn't have a Bible, he's just been journeying with God, and he's been living decades with barely seeing promise fulfilled, having one descendant, or by his death, 2 grandsons, but not getting a single square inch in the land. He has to spend 407 pounds of silver to buy a cave area. The fact that this God, he keeps his promise, and so this life is not it. This is not everything. There's the next life. So that's just amazing. And God's way is amazing too. The fact that he doesn't let him see it, and gives a clue of, well, not only the resurrection thing, but the life after this life. So, yeah. And then we see the descendants, just like the physical thing of physical descendants, we end up seeing that fulfilled with the very promised land right there, Israel living there. And then physical descendants being Israel, but then quote-unquote spiritual descendants being us. And we know that, I have to take, with the New Covenant saints, passage after passage about inheriting the whole earth with Christ. There are, some things that get kind of complicated and kind of hard to know exactly, but with the whole Psalm 2, God saying, ask of me and I'll give you the nations for your inheritance, the end of the earth as your possession. And New Covenant saints get to become heirs of God, joint heirs with Christ. So basically, the promises that are given to Christ also get fulfilled with his people. That whole co-heir thing. Christ gets the whole world, and that promise applies to his people. So, we're going to inherit the whole earth, new heavens and new earth. And when you see things like in the Gospels, like the New Covenant saints, they'll come from the east and west and sit down, recline with Abraham. They're going to feast with him or something. Those get you to see that after there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth, when you see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all the prophets in the kingdom of God, and you yourselves thrown out, they will come from the east and west and north and south and recline in the kingdom of God. So the context has to be speaking about, well, New Covenant saints included, but in the kingdom there's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the prophets, Jesus says. So they're included in this thing. So that's why, based on passages like this, that there is this, and along with, as I said, Romans 4:13, heir of the world, that there's a greater fulfillment that way, that he's a part of the whole inheriting the whole earth thing. So, just our God, the way he works is just amazing. How we see that at the beginning, he started his journey where he was, but as he experiences God, his faithfulness, even with his lack of faith, God delivering, God doing this, that, more and more his faith is growing with kind of the pinnacle, Isaac's supernatural conception and birth. He's come to a point where he believes in a resurrection that's possible with this God, which God actually does, but he reserved it for his son. And then till the end of his life, he never got a square inch. He had to spend all that money, but we have to conclude that he would have known this God, he keeps his word. And so the conclusion has to be, there's a life after this. This is not everything. So that very glimpse of the next life, which is true, which is biblically true, but even with no revelation that Abraham had, with that promise, there was that glimpse of revelation. It's just amazing. So, our God is a God of faith. It's a big deal. I think, next week, probably seeing, Israelites not entering into the promised land, faith comes up. Remember, very interesting, the reason why Moses was not able to enter in, he struck the rock, and God brings up the issue of faith. You do not believe me? very interesting. And author of Hebrews goes into how they did not enter because of their disobedience, disbelief, and and lots of other things in Scripture about faith. So, any thoughts or anything?
That God was very patient with Abraham. For example, like not once but twice when he says his wife was his sister, and all the other time, I think about when Zechariah, when God caused Zechariah to, he shut Zechariah's mouth until John was born, and like Abraham didn't believe in a lot of things, and yet God was very merciful to him through all of that, knowing that there was that promise that he had committed. I don't know. It's just something that I've been thinking.
Yeah, and the very fulfillment. The other amazing part is just till this day. It's been 4,000 years, and we have Abraham's literally Abraham's descendants, his physical descendants, all over the world. That very thing fulfilled, just like he said, as the stars in the sky, and then of course his quote unquote spiritual descendants, all who are a part of the faith. God's ways are amazing, and